Thanks, Chris. It's a great pleasure, Hatem, to be here to celebrate your retirement, but I've got some better ideas for you, which I'll explain in my talk for you. Yeah. But clearly, the topic that I chose today really follows on from David and from Gus in terms of academic medicine and leadership in hospitals. And I think Chris's description of Hatem's basically, he's the consummate example of a research physician. And you've seen the benefit that accrued from that role in the many people that he has trained in the same philosophy. And I think, Hatem, that's clearly you're medically qualified, physician trained, specialty qualified, an excellent clinician, skilled in the basic science and techniques, an inquisitive mind, patient problems triggering research, and a great communicator and a role model. So you couldn't want a better example of that. And again, this comes back, and this is not in any way taking away from people who do a PhD, but one of the things that a medical degree gives you is basic and clinical knowledge, an understanding of the whole organism, and skills in problem solving. Every patient is a problem that you have to solve. And it also extends into the analysis of data and the questioning of accuracy. And all of those, to me, are clearly issued and clearly embodied in the career that Hatem has had. Is the research physician an endangered species? Well, you know, there are several issues there. The length of the medical course and then specialty training, an additional research degree, and today undertaking and having to pay for it, an unclear career path based on uncertain research funding, and we've all heard the importance of the McKeon Review, the uncertainty of research funding, and clearly more lucrative pathways elsewhere in medical profession. I just want to use a study which I could never have done if I did not have a medical degree, because it took me out of my comfort zone as a reproductive endocrinologist and leading to areas of research which, Hatem, I'm going to involve you in when you step down here. And basically, follistatin acts because it binds FSH and stops it from functioning. And the activins, I'm just going to concentrate on one of them, is Activin A, which is a beta A dimer, and it's 100% conserved from the mouse to the human, suggesting that that's an important gene. And follistatin is 97% conserved, the molecule that binds it and controls it. So if it's been a species that's fiddled around with the genes that encode for these proteins, they effectively haven't survived. So it tells us that this is very important. And follistatin actually sits on most of the surfaces of every cell in the body, bound to heparan sulfate proteoglycans. And the way it acts is that it actually binds and grabs activin and then targets it to a lysosomal degradation pathway. And so it's a way of modulating and controlling activin's activities. There are other pathways as well, but this is probably the major pathway that controls activin. So how does this come back to Hatem? Well, activin's part of the TGFB family of proteins, and it's a subfamily now. And I'm coming back to transforming growth factor beta in a minute. And follistatin, if you like, sits and bridges the activins and the BMP subfamily, including myostatin. And it's very topical at the moment, gentlemen. Myostatin, muscle stop. Follistatin blocks not only activin, blocks myostatin. And guess what the bodybuilders are doing? And guess what the Essendon Football Club might have been doing as well? Myopep 7. It goes under the name of follistatin. You go to the bodybuilders' websites, they're taking follistatin purified from crude egg yolks. God knows what the purity is, but they're taking it and they're putting on muscle and they're not dying. They've done a phase 1 study for follistatin already. But why did we get involved? Look, I'm an endocrinologist. When you want to know where the factor is, you take out the organ. With inhibin, when we did that, inhibin disappeared from the circulation. We thought, oh, well, follistatin suppresses FSH, we'll do the same experiment. Follistatin went up when we castrated the animals, but it also went up in the sham-operated animals, which told us it was part of the acute phase response and started to get us interested in what was happening. And what you can see on this panel is that if you give lipopolysaccharide, the out-of-cell wall of Salmonella bacteria, to a mouse, you can see that within 40 minutes you have a peak of activin, and then it continues to be elevated for 24 hours later. It actually stimulates follistatin. You can see the peak of follistatin in there in these mice. It comes out just before TNF-alpha, and you can see the peak of TNF-alpha. IL-6 coming out and IL-1, typical inflammatory cascade to LPS. Well, if you give the mouse a microgram of follistatin an hour before you give the lipopolysaccharide, so activin is now coming out in the presence of an increased amount of its binding protein, peak of activin still occurs. The second peak of activin doesn't occur, suggesting that activin is actually stimulating its own production. If you look at follistatin, that big peak of follistatin doesn't occur, so activin is stimulating its binding protein. If you look at TNF-alpha, activin is actually halving. Blocking follistatin is halving the amount of TNF-alpha that's produced. It's changing the whole IL-6 pattern. Instead of IL-6 coming out at 2 hours, now it's coming out at 1 hour, and it's augmented about fourfold in terms of magnitude. And IL-1 shows a similar temporal trend, but you don't get the augmentation. So blocking the actions of activin changes the whole cytokine cascade. If you give enough LPS, you kill the mouse. If you give follistatin, you halve the mortality of that lethal dose of LPS. And can you translate that into clinical areas? Well, I'm sorry, and you can see that these mice, the ones that died, have higher levels of activin compared to the mice that survived. And that's the raw data on the right-hand side of that slide. You take a patient in septicemia, and in that slide there, CRP is the red dots, and you can see this is a patient in septicemia who's in hospital for 26 days. And you can see the peaks of activin and follistatin track, basically, the pattern of CRP. And in general, the higher the level of activin, the more likely you are to die, and we've now confirmed that in a big study in conjunction with a group in Finland. Turning to hospital, research that's happened in this hospital with my colleague Robin O'Hare, if you turn to cystic fibrosis. The little box on the left-hand side of the slide is the normal range of activin. Look at the range of activin levels in patients with cystic fibrosis. Not unexpected, an inflammatory disease causing infection, inflammation, and you can see the vast increase. And if you relate that to FEV1, the higher the level of activin, the more likely you are to have a lower FEV1 and forced expiratory volume. And basically what's happened is I could never have had that. I mean, I hadn't thought about inflammation for a long, long time. But that very basic studies, the basic training I got way back at the University of Melbourne actually set me up to go and look. Inflammation at a tissue level and pathology hasn't changed. All of the substances that have been identified that control it have emerged since that time. And that sort of brings it back here to this area of the BMPs. And again, you know, TGF-beta sits there as a molecule that's well recognized as a major inflammatory marker and also a major stimulator of fibrosis. Activin also stimulates fibrosis. Quite clearly, it's been demonstrated in bleomycin-induced fibrosis, in cystic fibrosis, in wound healing. So activin's also a major stimulus to inflammation and fibrosis. Activin stimulates fibroblasts to divide and synthesize collagen. TGF-beta, as I pointed, is a powerful stimulator, but actually, if you put TGF-beta on a fibroblast, believe it or not, it produces activin. And the fibrotic actions of TGF-beta can be blocked by follistatin. Yet if you put follistatin on a column and run TGF-beta, follistatin won't bind TGF-beta. It will bind activin, it will bind myostatin, it will bind some of the other BMPs. So could this mean that TGF-beta is acting through activin and that activin might be an important common pathway? If you then look at the roles of TGF-beta, endothelin, angiotensin II, all act by stimulating TGF-beta to produce fibrosis. So could it possibly be that activin is actually the final common pathway to fibrosis, given that it's essentially 100% conserved from the mouse to the human? And coming back to hematology, one of the questions we've asked is, we've just been looking at molecules that stimulate TGF-beta and have an action on fibrosis, and alpha-thrombin is just one of those. So we actually asked the question, if you put alpha-thrombin on a fibroblast, does it actually produce TGF-beta? It does produce TGF-beta, and it does produce activin, and actually a huge increase in activin when you stimulate fibroblasts. So here we are, some suggestions that activin may well be the final common pathway to fibrosis. And Hatem, I need you, you can't retire. Your brain's too active. You have to come in and help an endocrinologist get into these complex areas. Thank you very much.